Good evening. My name is Tommy Tidwell. Some of you that's taken my class on Thursday nights on Exodus, you know who I am. But tonight I'm covering Brother Dave Rogers' class on Jeremiah and Lamentations. We've got a 2-hour class, and I'm supposed to cover from chapter 42 through the 51st chapter. So we're going to try to get along here and do the very, very best we can. I know that I'm not as good a teacher as him, but I will give it my dead level best anyway. Before we begin, let's pray. Thank you, Father, for the day and for the blessings you give us. I thank you for the school. I thank you for every student here and online. And I pray, Lord, your richest blessings upon all of us, that we might know your will and that we might know your word. We know, Lord, that the only way that this world will ever be saved is by the preaching of the gospel. And we pray that we might be as fired up about preaching as Jeremiah was. We also know, Lord, that sometimes we're going to get discouraged and depressed about these things. When we look and it seems like sometimes nobody's listening. But Father, let our cry be as clear as it can, that we preach Christ and him crucified. Bless us now as we enter this time of study. Keep us in your care in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, all righty. As I said, we're covering Jeremiah chapter 42 through 49, but to kind of get back on that, or actually 42 through 51, I'm sorry. But to kind of get back on that, before we go any further, let me go ahead and emphasize to you again, if you're looking in the syllabus, your assignment for tonight is a 500-word historical synopsis of the battle mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 46 and verse 2. And that would be the Battle of Carchemish. Okay, so you need to get that and get that to Brother Rogers as soon as you can, as the assignments are as we're going through here. In chapters 39 through 41, as we've been studying, or as you've been studying, here we find about the fall of Jerusalem. God had prophesied about that event going to take place. Jeremiah had been the one that was prophesying about it. And in essence, to make a long story short, everything that Jeremiah had been talking about came true, is fruition. We notice there in chapter 40, after, I'm just trying to pick back up there, different commentaries suggest that the section from chapter 40 through 52 kind of fits, or 51 fits in together. So we understand that. Chapter 39 gives us the fall of Jerusalem. Chapter 51 of Jeremiah will again talk about the fall of Jerusalem because it becomes such a key, important point to the people of that day. Chapter 40, Jeremiah had the opportunity to stay in Jerusalem. He had 3 options here. He could have stayed in Jerusalem. He could have gone with the captives to Babylon, or he could have chosen to go wherever he wanted to. And he decided to stay in Jerusalem. No doubt probably because his heart was there. No doubt because he had seen those people and had tried to the very best of his ability to encourage them to come back to the Lord. But we also, as you're going to study the next couple of weeks, they're looking at the idea of Lamentations and him writing the Lamentations and what he sees there at that time. He stays there with Gedaliah. Again, who was Gedaliah? You better remember?
Well, Gedaliah was the governor.
He was the governor that Nebuchadnezzar had put in place there. He was the one that really was going to stand for that. So that's right. He's the governor. He's representing Babylon's interest there in that particular time. So again, he gives Jeremiah the choice of what he's going to do. So Jeremiah does do that. And then we find as we go a little bit further that Gedaliah in chapter 41 was murdered. We remember studying about that. You should remember studying about that last week. Who did it? Who killed him? Ishmael and some of his men in that situation. And so not only did he kill Gedaliah, but he also killed 80 Jews that had come back, last part, to give their offerings to the temple. Now, here was a bloody cutthroat in and of him by himself, was he not? And so as you look at this, you've thrown all the bodies of the men in the cistern, and finally, we find that Johanan had come and was going to fight against Ishmael. And so Ishmael saw Johanan, the son of Kareah, and all the leaders of the forces with him. They rejoiced. They killed Ishmael. And now they take with him all from Mizpah, all the rest of the people that he had recovered from Ishmael after he had struck them down. And They intended, chapter 41, verse 17, they intended to go to Egypt because of the Chaldeans. For they were afraid of them because Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, had struck down Gedaliah. And they really were afraid that in this whole situation, if they had stayed there, they would have received further repercussions from Babylonian forces for killing the governor. So we pick up with chapter 42. Then all the commanders of the forces, and what we're talking about forces here are the guerrilla forces that were fighting around that time whenever Nebuchadnezzar finally took it. And Johanan and Jezaniah and all the people from the least to the greatest came near and said to Jeremiah, let our plea for mercy come before you. Pray to the Lord your God for us. I always find that very interesting whenever I'm reading through Scripture, and I see, as in the case of Saul and some of these others, I see the situation where sometimes we find that they say the Lord your God, not the Lord our God, the Lord your God. So they're asking for Jeremiah, pray to the Lord, and we are but a few, as your eyes see us, that the Lord your God may show us the way we should go and the things we should do. And Jeremiah the prophet said, I've heard you. I will pray the Lord your God according to your request, and whatever the Lord answers, I will tell you. I will keep nothing back from you. Then they say to Jeremiah, may the Lord be a true and faithful witness against us if we do not act according to all the word which the Lord your God sends you to us. Whether it's good or bad, we will obey the voice of the Lord. So here they're asking, number one, we want to know what God is saying to us about this. Number two, we are making a commitment that we will do whatever the Lord yours says. We will obey the voice of the Lord our God, to whom we are sending you, that it may be well with us when we obey the voice of the Lord our God. Now, as this story continues to develop, at the end of 10 days, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. And in the process of time, sometimes whenever we're waiting, as it was for a short period of time, we decide that we're going to come up with our own plans, with our own ideas. It's not as quick as we want it to be. You know, sometimes one of the favorite things, and this is something to spend some time preaching about, but it's the idea of seeing how many times the Bible emphasizes to wait on the Lord. You know, we want an answer right now. And sometimes, true or false, we're living in a culture today that some people say, well, I can't wait on the Lord, so I'll just come up with something, or actually they will actually say something along this line. The Lord spoke to me in some way or another, where it's not so much the Lord speaking to them as their own spirit telling them what they wanted to do all along anyway, right? Yeah. Nothing new under the sun. Here we have the same situation going on here in Jeremiah chapter 42. They had already made up their mind what they wanted to do. They just wanted Jeremiah to affirm what their idea was. And when Jeremiah tells them something totally different than what they planned, they said, we're not going to do it. They back up on that commitment that they made. And they back up on everything. So again, what Jeremiah is, and God is asking them to do here, in essence, is to have enough faith in God to believe his promises. And brothers and sisters, that's really the real big aspect of our lives today, isn't it? Do we have enough faith to take God at his word? Yeah. The world today will sit back and say, well, I have faith, but you don't have enough faith to be baptized in the name of Jesus for the remission of your sins. So you're still wanting it, but you want it your way. You know, members of the church say, well, I have faith, but, you know, I don't see why I've got to do certain things for the Lord. I don't know why I've got to come back to church on Sunday evenings when the elders say so. I don't understand that. So it's just a man-made command, so I'll just do what I want to do anyway, and that we end up doing it anyway. Have you ever noticed the fact that those that are that way, their faith begins to weaken? And then what begins to happen after that, they will think that because maybe they're there once a week, that's all they need to do, and they will satisfy themselves, well, I've been the guy, and I give him, and we hear this a lot of times. I don't mean to preach about this, but I won't think about it. Do I have to attend Wednesday night? No, you don't have to. Nobody has to, right? Yeah. But if you love the Lord, you will want to. And if you have faith in the Lord, you will want to. And so that to me is really the key thing. It's really a struggle of faith. Our entire lives, especially with those of us as Christians, is all about a struggle for faith, isn't it? Will we keep the faith? Will we be faithful unto death? Revelation 2 verse 10. And that's always the question. So He summoned Johanan and all the commanders of the forces who were with him and all the people from the least to the greatest. I'm now in chapter 42, verse 7. And said to them, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, whom you sent to present your plea of mercy for me, if you will remain in this land, then I will build you up and not pull you down. I will plant you and not pluck you up, for I relent of the disaster that I did to you. Do not fear the king of Babylon, of whom you're afraid. You see, God knew they were afraid. He said, do not fear. How many times in Scripture do you find that passage or that idea? Somebody has said it over 365 different times in Scripture. So that's that idea. Don't fear the king. Don't fear him, for I am with you to save you and deliver you from his hand. I will grant you mercy, and I will have mercy on you and let you remain in your own land. God is a God of mercy. In the book of Exodus, chapter 32 through 34, we find that God, after the children of Israel had committed the sin of the golden calf, he reaffirms a covenant to them. And he says, now I want you to know that part of the terms of the covenant is that you may know me. And in Exodus 34 specifically, he says, I want you to know that I'm a God that is long-suffering and full of mercy. And as you read that, that's why it interests me, and I hope it interests all of us as well, to think about the fact that God, in his self-revelation through the Scriptures, is telling us what he wants us to know about him. And the first thing that he wants us to know is that he's a God of mercy and a God of love and a God of long-suffering. And at the very end of that passage, he emphasizes, but I at the same time will not what? I will not pass by iniquity. So if God is a God and wants to be known as a God of mercy and love, then that should be something that should motivate us to greater service. And so even here, he's saying, I will have mercy on you. I will let you remain in your own land. But if you say, we will not remain in this land, if you disobey the voice of the Lord your God, saying, we will go to the land of Egypt, and Jeremiah, as he's preaching this and telling them this, he may have looked at the audience. And he may have seen, and some of them were sitting there, hoping, well, yeah, the Lord's going to tell us to go to Egypt, right? And he's saying all along, no, God's not wanting you to go to Egypt. Even back in the book of Exodus, he will tell the Jews at that time, don't you go back there. I delivered you from that land. I've redeemed you. I bought you. You are my people. Don't go back to Egypt. And here they are, ready to pack up and go back to Egypt. So as you're sitting there telling them what the Lord says, you probably see the look on their faces like, I'm not believing he's saying that. Surely this is crazy because Gedaliah has been killed. Nebuchadnezzar and his army is going to come back and just to destroy us because of what we've done or because of what has happened. And this is insane. They're listening to their ideas rather than what God clearly says. And I think as you read that in verse 15, then hear the word of the Lord, O remnant of Judah. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, if you set your faces to enter Egypt and go live there, then the sword that you fear will overtake you there in the land of Egypt. And the famine of which you are afraid shall follow close after you to Egypt, and there you shall die. All the men who set their faces to go to Egypt to live there shall die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. There shall have no remnant or survivor from the disaster that I will bring upon them. And then here you have this phrase that Jeremiah and so many of these other Bible people bring out. It's this idea of, thus says the Lord of hosts. This is not Jeremiah the prophet. This is the Lord of hosts. As my anger and wrath were poured out on the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so my wrath will be poured out on you when you go to Egypt, he says. And he says, you shall become an execration, a horror, a curse, a taunt. And so as he's looking at them, he's telling them, this is what's going to happen. You will see this place no more. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen when you go. I see it in your faces. That's what you want to do. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. You shall see this place no more. The Lord has said to you, O remnant of Judah, do not go to Egypt. Know for a certainty that I have warned you this day that you have gone astray at the cost of your lives. Now, they had not said nothing up to him now, right? To him, right? The only thing I could figure is, again, he's seeing it in their faces. And that was all he needed. And he gets fired up about this, and he's telling them. And you think about how he must have been discouraged to no believe, because he had been preaching for all this time and they wouldn't listen. They didn't surrender to the forces of Babylon. The city was destroyed 586 BC. Zedekiah, the last thing he sees was his son being killed. The captivity was going back. He's just leaving as it was just a very few people left in the land. And he's telling them again, I have been preaching all this time, telling you all this. You wouldn't listen to me now. You're not listening then, and you won't listen to me now. You're going to regret it. Have you ever preached and tried to encourage people to do something, maybe one-on-one or maybe publicly, and you could see it in their faces? I'm not going to do that. I know that's what the Bible says. How many of you heard say, well, I know that's what the Bible says, but. You know, and it's the same exact. People have not changed. People have not changed. Do what?
Or they don't care what the Bible.
They don't care what the Bible says. They don't care about the word of the Lord. They want to do what they want to do, and what they want is preachers to reaffirm their what they already want to do as it is anyway, right? So the bottom line is as you're looking at this whole thing, he's emphasizing to them, I've warned you. And he says, you sent me to the Lord your God, saying, pray to us. And this day I declared it to you, but you have not obeyed the voice of the Lord your God in anything that he sent me to tell you. Know for a certainty you will die by the sword, by famine, and by the pestilence. And when he had finished speaking to all the people, all these words of the Lord their God, Azariah the son of Hoshea and Johanan and all the insolent men, I like that, the English Standard Version says that the prideful men, the insolent men, you are telling a lie. The Lord did not send you to say that. Do not go to Egypt to live there. But Baruch, the son of Neriah, Baruch, now notice the word Baruch there. In chapter 45, he's going to have to encourage Baruch a little bit. Baruch, the son of Neriah, has set you against us, deliver us into the hand of the Chaldeans, that they may kill us and take us into exile. So Johanan and all of the people did not obey the voice of the Lord to remain in the land of Egypt. But they took the remnant of Judah, who were to live in the land of Judah, the men, the women, the children, the princesses, and every person whom Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, had left with Gedaliah. And they came into the land of Egypt, for they did not obey the voice of the Lord, and they arrived at Taphanes. Now, I've got a map here, and I don't know, you could pick this up from different Bible maps, but Taphanes is right here. Remember, this was the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel lived. Taphanes was right here, just literally right when you crossed into the border. And they had a little bit of a throne room there, because sometimes there would be times when the king would come up from Memphis and some of these other places, and he would come to the borders of the kingdom to reaffirm the idea that he was what? King. And I want to remind you this far up, and I'm still king. I'm still Pharaoh. I'm still in charge. So he had a throne room here and a seat to where he would judge the people up in here, and then there would be times when he would travel back up and down the Nile River. So Taphanes is right here. Here's was Jerusalem, so it was just a very quick, short, and this was what we called, according to what we read in the book of Exodus, this was known as the way of the Philistines. Okay? What the Philistines did, they would skirt the whole Mediterranean Sea up through here. So they literally come down this way of the Philistines. If you're studying my class on Exodus, you understand that they left the land of Goshen and crossed probably right in here, the Red Sea, and then they came down here to Mount Sinai, which is where? It's in Arabia today, okay? So I want you to keep in mind just where they went back to. And at that point, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. They arrived at Taphanes, and they brought Jeremiah with them. So he says, take in your hand large stones and hide them in the mortar in the pavement that is the entrance to Pharaoh's palace, in the sight of the men of Judah. It says, thus says the Lord, I will send and take Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant. Now, I'm sure you've already seen this through the book of Jeremiah, the idea that Babylon was his servant. Nebuchadnezzar was his servant. I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar didn't believe that totally. I'm sure Daniel tried to emphasize that to him whenever he was there in Daniel chapter 4. But the reality was, and this is something that I've loved whenever I read through scriptures, the fact that God is in charge of all the nations. He is not just in charge of certain nations. He's in charge of the world. And so he says, you take these large stones, you hide them in the mortar. And he says, Nebuchadnezzar shall come and strike the land of Egypt, giving over to the pestilence those who are doomed to the pestilence, to captivity to those who are to captivity, and to the sword who are doomed to the sword. I shall kindle a fire in the temple of the gods of Egypt, and he shall burn them and carry them away captive. Now, this was one of the things that Nebuchadnezzar and a lot of the other kings at that time did, Assyrians and others. They would go, and whenever they would take a land, they would take the temples and rifle the temples and take these images back with them to show that what? Our gods, Marduk and so forth, are greater than these gods that we have the statuary of. And he says, so that's what they would do. They would actually, as it was, carry the gods as captive as well. What's interesting about this, as again you read Egyptian history, that's exactly what happened. Nebuchadnezzar did go in, rifled the temples, took their gods back. And one of the things that endeared many of the subjugated people to the Persians was the fact that the Persians would allow them to do what? Take their gods back. Okay? And we read about that specifically with Daniel and the fact that he would allow the children of Israel to go back. Cyrus, Isaiah 45 and Isaiah 44 and 45. And we remember reading in Ezra's day that he would allow many of the temple dishes and so forth to go back to Jerusalem. So this was something that would endear them.
Now, why would they want God back? If they're serving a God that can't protect himself, you know what I mean? When you look at it like that,
when you look at it like that,
we serve. You let yourself get captive. We got to come get you.
Yeah.
The God that we serve.
May I suggest the ideal is because when it comes to religion, a lot of logic flies out the window. In other words, it's gone. We're not going to think things through because, after all, this is religion. And so this happens in religious world today, right? Well, I don't care what the Bible says, or we don't logically sit down and think about what the Bible says. We will sit down and try to come up with our explanations for it. And so maybe the gods were having a bad year whenever the Nebuchadnezzar came through, but we get our gods back, put them back in their temples, then they will bless us again, you know.
Go back to sacrifices and everything.
That's exactly right. Same song, second verse. Didn't do no good then, won't do no good now. But am I right? Logic a lot of times does fly out the window, right?
God can protect himself.
That's right.
How can he protect us?
That's right. And you see, all through this, one of the things that God is emphasizing through this, I allowed my people to be punished, and the Assyrians in Isaiah's time, in Babylon, in Babylon's time, would emphasize, well, our gods are greater than your God because our gods beat your God. Failing to realize that our God was punishing his people. That our God was punishing us because of our sin. That we are his special people. So he shall break the obelisks of Heliopolis, which is in the land of Egypt, and the temples of the god of Egypt he shall burn with fire. So we come back to chapter 44. Now, as we're getting there quickly, the word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the Judeans who lived in the land of Egypt, at Migdol, at Taphanes, at Memphis, in the land of Pathros. Memphis was down here. There's Pithom, Succoth, Taphanes, Etham. So they're living all up and down like everybody else. They're living up and down the Nile River. Why? The rest of this is desert, right? So they have to live up and down through here some way. So he's telling all of them. He's emphasizing them. You have seen the disaster that I brought upon Jerusalem and all the cities of Judah. This day they are a desolation. No one dwells in them because of the evil that they committed, provoking me to anger. And they went and served other gods. Yet I persistently sent to you all my servants, the prophets, saying, oh, do this, do not do this abomination that I hate. But they did not listen or incline their ear to turn from their evil and make no offerings to other gods. Again, read this and compare it with 2 Kings 17 and 2 Kings 25. where again, he emphasizes that he sent the prophets. And he says, do not do this abomination that I hate, but they did not listen. They did not incline their ear, turn from their evil, and make no offerings to other gods. As preachers and teachers, sometimes we try to the best of our ability to try to encourage people to do what the Lord wants them to do, but they won't listen. And we walk away beating ourselves up sometimes, right? If I'd have said things differently, if I'd have done things differently. The bottom line is some people's hearts are not disposed to hear the word of God. But does that give us the right to stop preaching it? No. And yet in the Lord's church today, it seems like that's exactly what's happened. We do the majority of our preaching and teaching inside the church building, not that much outside. And could that be part of the reason why our culture is going the way it's going? Could that be part of the reason why we're not baptizing people like we were earlier, many, many years ago? He says, verse 6, my wrath and my anger were poured out and kindled in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem. They became a waste and a desolation as it is this day. And thus says the Lord, why do you commit this great evil against yourselves? Notice, against yourselves. You're doing this to yourself. You're making bad decisions. You're doing this to yourselves. He says, why do you commit this to cut off man and woman, infant and child from the midst of Judah? Why do you provoke me to anger with the works in your hands, making offerings to other gods, that you come to live so that you be cut off and become a curse among all the nations? Have you forgotten the evil of your fathers? They have not humbled themselves even to this day, nor have they feared, nor walked in my law and statutes which I set before you and your fathers. Thus says the Lord, I will cut off all Judah. I'll take the remnant of Judah who've set their faces to come to the land of Egypt to live. They shall be consumed. From the least to the greatest, they shall die by the sword and by famine. They shall become an oath, a horror, a curse, and a taunt. And I will punish those who dwell in the land of Egypt as I punished Jerusalem. They shall not return except some fugitives. Well, what do the people say? Now they're hearing Jeremiah preach this again. They're in Taphanes now. And they're kind of probably breathing a sigh, really, well, we're in Egypt now. We've run away from Nebuchadnezzar, and it's not going to be no problem. And Jeremiah is saying, run where you want to. You're still going to be punished because you did not obey. And listen to what they said. As for the word, verse 16, that you've spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we will not listen to you. We will do everything that we have vowed. Make offerings to the Queen of Heaven. The Queen of Heaven is Ishtar. She was supposedly the Queen of Heaven. And notice their thinking. Now again, here's the logic of man versus the Word of God. Here's their thinking. He says, we will make offerings to the Queen of Heaven, pour out drink offerings to her, as we did, both we and our fathers, our kings and our officials in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of food and prospered, and saw no disaster. But since we left off making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything and have been consumed by the sword and by famine. And the women said, when we made offerings to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings to her, was it without our husband's approval that we made cakes for her, bearing her image, and poured out drink offerings to her? So what's their logic? Well, the reason we got in this mess is because we stopped worshiping the Queen of Heaven. Now that probably hails back to the time of Josiah. When Josiah had gone in there, and remember Jeremiah was preaching some of the time of Josiah, when Jeremiah had gone in there and tried to wipe out idolatry unlike any other king before him. One of the things that you'll read in 1 Kings and also in Chronicles is the idea that these kings, a lot of those good kings in Judah, would strive to get the people to come back to worship the Lord, like Hezekiah. Josiah went the extra step and did everything he possibly could to totally obliterate every bit of idolatry. And these people are sitting back looking and saying, that's the reason why we're suffering, because we can't worship our gods anymore that we were worshiping in Israel. And back then, everything was fine. And yet all along, Jeremiah and others were trying to tell them, no, you're going to be punished for your sins. You're going to be punished for the sins of Manasseh. You just come to grips with that, right? So Jeremiah again tries to tell them. As for the offerings that you offer to the cities and the streets of Jerusalem, you and your fathers, your kings, and your officials, and the people of the land, did not the Lord remember them? He remembered them. It came to his mind, and that's why his wrath was poured out. You see, that's what Jeremiah's trying to get across to them. It was because of their sins that these things were being what? Fulfilled. So he says, the Lord could no longer bear your evil deeds and the abominations that you committed. Therefore your land has become a desolation and a waste and a curse without the inhabitant. It is because you made offerings and sins against the Lord and did not obey the voice of the Lord to walk in his law. And he says, hear the word of the Lord. And one thing and I'm sure you've seen this already through the book of Jeremiah, they could not say that they had not heard God's word. Would today that we would preach in such a way to where people would look at it and say, well, we can't blame these people out here who try to tell us the truth. That's the way it should be with all of us, right? That's the way it should be with all of us. And so he emphasizes that to them and says to them, this is the reason. He said, you've sinned against the Lord. He went on and he says to all the women, hear the voice of the Lord. You and your wives had declared that from your mouths and fulfilled it with your hands, saying, we will perform our vows that we've made, then confirm your vows and perform your vows. But hear the word of the Lord. I have sworn by my great name. Now, again, this is something even back in Genesis chapter 15. God will say, I can swear by none greater, so I swear by my name, right? So again, one of the great studies that we could spend so much time on, and hopefully we would do that during a class like the Godhead, is the idea of truly understanding what his name represents. All of God's laws, all of God's commandments are a outshoot of who he is. They all come from who he is and his holiness. And so he says, let me say that. He goes on, he says, confirm your vows, perform your vows. But I swore by my great name that my name shall no more be invoked by the mouth of any man of Judah in all the land of Egypt, saying, as the Lord God lives. I'm watching over them for disaster. They shall be consumed by the sword and by famine until there is an end to them. And those who escape the sword shall return from the land to the land of Judah, few in number. And all the remnant of Judah who came to the land of Egypt shall know whose word will stand, mine or theirs. Well, again, he said, I will give Hophra, king of Egypt, into the hand of his enemies, and into the hand of those who seek his life, as I gave Zedekiah, king of Judah, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. It was just a very short time after this. But Nebuchadnezzar then came and took Egypt. He took their gods. He destroyed their temples. And he destroyed these people in Judah that had run down here, thinking this was the safest place to be at that moment in time. Now, as we're looking at this, you can't help but see the idea that God is just trying to emphasize this is what happens to those who are disobedient to me. What is the lesson today? My God does not change. I am a God that changes not, he will say in Malachi 3. God has not changed. So when we follow the altars of our gods, whether it's technology or money or football or whatever it is that gets in our way of our relationship with God and says to God, Lord, I want to do this, but I want to do your will, but I've got to find some time for you, God. And God says, seek first the what? The kingdom. He's emphasizing to us in this lesson from the Old Testament, a lesson Romans 15:4 and 1 Corinthians 10:11, a lesson that emphasizes to us that we need to listen to them. This lesson needs to be fulfilled upon all of us, right? So this was tragedy upon tragedy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The place was destroyed. Jerusalem was destroyed. It's a smoking heap of ruins. But he tries to give some of them the opportunity to stay there, and they refuse to do it. And here again, what happens? They go to Egypt, and they wind up paying the price. God's word is true. Now here you have verse chapter 45, very short chapter, but I love this little chapter. the word that Jeremiah the prophet spoke to Baruch, the son of Neriah, when he wrote these words in a book at the dictation of Jeremiah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim. So this part actually goes back to another part long before, we're talking about 23 years before the destruction of Jerusalem. And what we have happening here in the last part of Jeremiah, we like books kind of in chronological order. That's the way we think. We think about it from a timely viewpoint. But a lot of times, especially with the prophets, a lot of things would be clumped together that would have different time frames here. So this is the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah. So this was about the same time, if you remember back earlier, where Jehoiakim had cut the word of God, Jeremiah's scroll, remember that, and burned it in a fire. So this was about the same time frame. And so you're asking, well, why did he put it back here at the end of it? But what he's doing is coming to the end of the book, and he's adding everything in there, rewriting. Remember, after he burned the scroll, what did the Bible say? That Baruch, Jeremiah gave him that and then some. So here's where he's finally collating and bringing everything, all of these prophecies for all this time that Jeremiah's been prophesying. He's bringing all this together. All right? So he says to him, thus says the Lord to you, O Baruch. You say, woe is me, for the Lord has added sorrow to my pain. I'm weary with my groaning, and I find no rest. I really appreciate this. Jeremiah, as you've already studied, had some times where his faith was really tested, right? And there were times, I believe, in Jeremiah chapter 20 where he said, what? I just want to quit. I don't want to do this anymore. And I will say this, there are times in every preacher's life that I've known of where they've all sat back and said, is this really what I need to be doing? Is this really where I need to be going? You know? So now I'm at chapter 45, and he says, so here he says, I'm weary. The Lord has added sorrow to my pain. I'm weary with my groaning, and I find no rest. He's wanted to quit. Jeremiah wanted to quit. And the beauty of this is Jeremiah has been there and done that. So as he's talking to Baruch, his scribe, he's given him some words of advice as he's facing these times of judgment, as he's facing these times of discouragement. We can get very discouraged in the work of the Lord. We can get discouraged in the work of the Lord when we see no visible efforts or results from our efforts. We can get discouraged in the work of the Lord when you keep on doing and keep on preaching and keep on emphasizing, and it just seems like nobody's getting it anymore. Where it seems like even in the Lord's church, as with the children of Israel, that everybody's listening to everybody else other than the word of the Lord. When we have Bible studies, and a lot of our Bible studies boil down to not what does the Lord say, but what do you think about this verse? Or what you feel about this verse, or what is your opinion about this verse? And you know what? None of that makes any difference. What did God say? That's the question. Do we believe the word of God? And so here he says again, he says, I know you're weary, and Jeremiah, you shall say to him, thus says the Lord, what I have built, I'm breaking down. What I have planted, I'm plucking up the whole land. God was the one that had blessed Israel. God was the one who gave them that land. God was the one who had gave them the opportunity to do what was right, and they blew it. And then he says this is a key thing, verse 5. Do you seek great things for yourself? There is in perhaps the bosom of every preacher this great desire to be well known, to be the preacher that everybody goes to. You know what I'm saying? And there's that desire. He says, do you seek great things for yourself? Seek them not. Preachers, Bible class teachers, elders, deacons, every member of the Lord's church ought to remember that it's not about us. It never has been about us. It is about the glory of God. But sometimes we allow the world's thinking to affect our thinking. Amen. And what winds up happening, we want to be well known, and the bottom line is That's not what it's about. That's not what it's about. Our job is to constantly, consistently, and all the time preach and emphasize what the glory of God is. But he says this. He says, I'm bringing disaster upon all flesh, but I will give you your life as a prize of war in all the places to which you may go. So don't worry. You're not going to die. You're not going to be great, but you're not going to die. And that is enough. Brothers and sisters, let me just encourage all of us to think about the fact we are his servants.
Right.
That's it. We are his servants. And that should be enough in and of and by itself. Okay? All right, chapter 46. Now, in Jeremiah chapter 1 and verse 5, as Brother Roger points out, God specifically calls Jeremiah the prophet to the nations, right? So here what we find is what we find in other parallel passages of Scripture where you find that God's prophet is going to be talking about other nations, okay? For example, we find that in Isaiah chapter 13 through 23, Isaiah chapter 13 through 23, there are foreign nation oracles there in Isaiah. In Ezekiel chapter 25 through 32, you have these foreign nations. What's going to happen to the foreign nations that had something to do with Israel? What's going to happen to them? And so he's going to begin and talking about them. And it's interesting that after this whole situation plays out in chapter 44 and 45, they're probably perhaps in Egypt at this moment in time, with the exception of chapter 45, which is the fourth year of Jehoiakim. So here you have, okay, let's talk about what's going to happen to Egypt. Let's talk about what's going to happen in that respect. And so he's going to talk about Egypt. He's going to talk about Moab. He's going to talk about Babylon. He's going to talk about the Philistines. He's going to talk about Ammon. He's going to talk about and then he's going to come back again and talk about Egypt one more time. Now, what in this section of this, we're going to find it ends in chapter 50 with the destruction of Babylon. So that's kind of encouraging words even there, because the Jews are saying, okay, what happened to Babylon is going to happen. So he tells them that, but what he does is he kind of talks to them at the battle right around the time of the Battle of Carchemish. And then later, as we said a little bit later on, he's going to talk about what's going to finally happen to Egypt and all these nations. So as you're looking at this, think about again how this section is very much related to what was going on in chapter 25. And he's taking that cup of the Lord's wrath, he's passing it to all the nations of his day. The nations would drink that cup, they stagger and fall to their destruction. And finally, he was saying in chapter 50, the king of Babylon will as well. All right? So again, we go back and we start studying this. The Battle of Carchemish was right around the year 605 BC. Okay? This was where, right around this time frame that Josiah died. He battled in this particular time frame. He had gone up, Pharaoh Necho had gone up through here at this time. And again, because all this was desert out here, the way that armies would pass would be following the Mediterranean Sea. You follow the water. Armies always have to follow water, right? Yeah. So that's the reality. So think about it. Here's a map here. It's Egypt to Canaan. So try to keep this in your mind. Here is Babylon down here. Right here is the Suez, the Persian Gulf. I'm sorry, the Gulf of Suez. This was the area of Syria. So Assyria for a long time was part of the ones that was in charge. And again, when everybody was coming down to Egypt, well, when they go, you can't go through this desert. You can't just cut across here and feed an army and water an army. You can't do that. So you'd have to follow the water. And notice the Tigris and Euphrates River would go up through this way. So you follow the water, then you come across here, and you'd have this Orontes, the river Orontes, the Leontes, and then the river Jordan. You would have all these offshoots from all these rivers coming down here. You're following the water.
You'd be ready to fight going through people's lands.
That's right. So that's part of the problem. You're right here. You're right here in this particular time. This is the land of Canaan. This is their land. Now, Egypt all up to this time, especially even before the Exodus and shortly thereafter, Egypt always has come in and conquered these little city-states all up through here. When you actually go and you begin to read Joshua conquering the land of Canaan, actually what he's conquering is cities. He talks about the 5 kings, and every one of those kings is king of a certain city. So because they had no cohesion here, the Egyptians would come up, or some other people would come down and just take all these little city-states. It wasn't until the time of the Israelites taking the land of Canaan that they actually had a unified area here. Okay? So this is kind of what's playing out here. And as you're thinking about it, think about how he's getting ready, everything ready to the Battle of Carchemish. Carchemish is right here. Carchemish is right here on the bank of the river Euphrates. All right? And for those of you on the internet, you need to find the map, but it was right here. This becomes a big battle spot over and over. This becomes a big battle spot over and over and over again because the Assyrians would here. And so you have the Egyptians fighting the Assyrians for a little while. Then they become, especially when Babylon begins to fight against Assyria, then they become Egyptians. You know how nations do today? What? They're making the League of Nations or something along that line, leagues with one another. So whenever Assyria is being attacked by Babylon, Egypt's going to come up here and help Carchemish. Who's down here in Jerusalem running the show down here at this moment in time? Josiah. And he comes out to fight against Necho. Necho kills him in battle, but Necho wasn't even worried about him. He was worried about the Babylonians, and so him and the Assyrians would come up here in Carchemish, and this is where they were defeated. Okay? So
you have to fight to go to fight.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's kind of what was happening there, and try to picture that at that particular time frame. That's exactly what was happening. So again, they would go along this line up through here because that was the quickest line to get back up there to the Battle of Carchemish. So this Battle of Carchemish, again, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, defeated. And so what happens is this. Egypt, Pharaoh Necho, under Egypt, was by the river at Carchemish, and they had defeated him. So here's how he describes the battle. Prepare buckler and shield and advance for battle. Harness the horses, mount, O horsemen. So again, picture that in your mind. Take your stations with your helmets. Polish your spears. Put on your armor. Okay? Why have I seen it? They are dismayed and have turned backward. Their warriors are beaten down and fled in haste. They look not back, terror on every side. So they're going up here and they're going to defeat Babylon, but when they get there, they got everything ready. The bucklers, the shields, and advance for battle. They've got everything ready. And then they have to run for their very lives. And by the way, as I said, this happened about the year 606, 605 BC, somewhere around that general area. So he comes down after that. Nebuchadnezzar comes down. And Pharaoh Necho, whenever he had killed Josiah, put up another king, Jeconiah, right? How long did Jeconiah reign? 3 months. Why only 3 months? Well, who put Jeconiah up there? Was Egypt. Who defeated Egypt? Nebuchadnezzar. So he comes down and says, no, you're not going to be my guy. He takes him to captivity and sets up Jehoiakim. Okay? Another one of Josiah's sons. He sets up Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim becomes the last worst king besides Zedekiah. Zedekiah obviously was there, but he was the one setting up the stage for everything else. Nebuchadnezzar placed a great deal of tribute and taxes on him, and so he would get it from all the rich people. But at the same time, Jehoiakim, he wasn't all that concerned about the poor. Surprise, surprise, surprise. The government not concerned about the poor. No, that's nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. Let's be honest, okay? I'm not trying to pull any punches here. They weren't concerned about the poor. What did he do? Well, he get taxes from anybody and everybody, because not only was Jehoiakim paying off tribute money to Nebuchadnezzar, but he was also beginning a massive building project. And guess what happens when you build stuff? You got to have money to build stuff, right? So where's he getting all the money from? That's right. So taxes were exorbitant. And they are just, they're struggling with all of this. And again, that's what's so sad about it. The poor people are always the one that what? And they're the ones that suffer in all of this. So you have these battles going on. Now here's what happens. The swift cannot flee away, nor the warrior escape. In the north by the river Euphrates, they have stumbled and fallen. Who is this rising like the Nile? So you see, he's comparing the floods of the Nile. He said, now here comes the Egyptians rising like the Nile. Egypt rises like the Nile, like rivers whose waters surge. He says, I will rise. I will cover the earth. I will destroy cities and their inhabitants. You hear what Egypt's saying? We're going to defeat Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to beat the Babylonians. And before it's all over with, what? Advance, O horses, rage, O chariots. Let the warriors out, men of Cush and Put, who handle the shield, men of Lud, who are skillful in handling the bow. So it's not only just Egyptians, but there's a coalition of forces. Cush, a lot of times, would represent the Ethiopians. All right? That day is the day of the Lord of hosts. Now, in this battle, who won? Nebuchadnezzar, right? But Jeremiah is saying, who orchestrated Egypt's defeat? God did. God did. It's a day of vengeance. He is avenging himself on his foes. The sword shall devour and be sated. What does the word sated mean? Just filled full. It's sick of blood. Can you just imagine the swords and the blood flowing that day? And drink its fill of their blood. The Lord God of hosts holds a sacrifice of humans as it was, a sacrifice of men, because they have turned away from God and no longer doing what God says. And he said, it's in the north country by the river Euphrates. Go up to Gilead, take balm, O virgin daughter of Egypt. In vain you have used many medicines. There's no healing for you. The nations have heard of your shame. The earth is full of your cry. Warrior has stumbled against warrior, and they've both fallen together. It's kind of like a rout. What happens in a rout? Everybody's trying to, it's every man for himself. That get out of my way. You don't get out of my way, I'll run over you, because, you know, and what's the old joke that we often say that you know, if you're in the woods and you have two people together and they meet a bear, the only one that really cares is whichever one runs the fastest, right? Because the bear get the one who doesn't run faster than I do, right? You know what I'm saying? So that's the idea, and that's what's happening here. It's a total rout. So here he says, declare in Egypt, proclaim in Migdol, declare in Memphis and Taphanes. And again, going back to the map that we were looking at earlier, Taphanes was here, Memphis was here. You have these various cities up and down the Nile River. He said, declare it. Stand ready and be prepared, for the sword shall devour you. Why are you mighty ones face down? They do not stand, because the Lord thrust them down. They made them stumble, and they fell, and they said to one another, arise and let us go back to our own people and to the land of our birth, because of the sword of the oppressor. Call the name of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Let noisy ones who lets the hour go by. So what's happening? Nebuchadnezzar's coming down, and he's going to attack Egypt. And so what's happening in this whole situation, he's saying, we're going to go back to the land of our birth, and that's it. We're just going to leave it. Nebuchadnezzar winds up, after that first battle, when he finally defeats the Assyrians, he winds up having to leave, but his armies still go down there toward that area. But he will wind up having to leave because his father, Nabopolassar, had died. So he winds up going back to Babylon. He takes the throne. And now he is going to come back later, again, in 597. And then he finally will destroy the city of Jerusalem in 586. Why? Because God, but because they're trying to do what? They're trying to make League of Nations. They're trying to trust in other nations rather than God.
Trying to form a NATO.
Yeah, that's in essence what it boils down to, and a lot of good it did them, right? And God's going to say, I told you not to go back to Egypt. You don't go back there for help. I will be your help. Oh, well, we don't care, God. We're going to go back and we're going to make this league and we're going to defeat them. No, it didn't work out that way. All right, let's pick up there. Let's take about a 5-minute break real quick. And we'll pick up there. 5 minutes. 5 minutes, okay? All right.
Okay, so,
Nice.
All right, we're back. Jeremiah chapter 46, as he continues to talk about Egypt and that destruction that's going on there. Remember, again, Babylon is coming up from the north. They always come from the north. Jeremiah chapter 1, he emphasizes what? In the very first part of the book, he says, you shall see a boiling pot facing away from the north. So that means what? It's facing south. And it means it's all going to pour out. This boiling pot's going to pour out down through here. So now he's coming to the end of the book. And this is where, again, all of these wars and these battles are being fought. So, again, we have the map. When you have a map, if you have the opportunity to get a hold of a map, look up these places. Declare in Egypt. Proclaim in Migdol, in Memphis, in Tamphet. So you're proclaiming it all up and down through here, where all of Egypt be ready and be prepared. For the sword shall devour around you. Why are your mighty ones face down? They do not stand because the Lord thrust them down. He made many stumble and they fell, and they said to one another, arise, let us go back to our own people, the land of our birth. Call the name of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, noisy one who lets the hour go by. So the idea is no matter how well he tried to prepare, it wasn't going to be enough when Baba. Yeah, thank you, brother. When Nebuchadnezzar came, I was going to get it. Nebuchadnezzar, when it comes. So there's the point. You know, he's just trying to bring out that idea. Now, this part here comes into play, and that's very important. And this is just prior to the Battle of Carchemish, and a lot of these next few things are going to be there, and then he's going to have another, as I said, at the very end of it, in chapter 46, verse 13, from where we are now through the 28th. This is the second Egyptian oracle. Now, he just ties them together. The first one is found in verses chapter 46, 1 through 12, and that was before the Battle of Carchemish. Now, this is the word that the Lord spoke to Jeremiah about the coming of Nebuchadnezzar to strike the land of Egypt. This part is when Nebuchadnezzar is going to come back down through here. He changed kings, and he actually comes down here and sacks Egypt, takes all the gods from their temple and starts destroying them. So I just want to get in our mind that you're still talking between the first situation, the 606, to the second situation. You're talking a period of about 20 years. But as you're reading this in verse 13 and following, you don't see that shift, okay? But this is what he's saying. He says, so you can declare all of this in Migdol, in Memphis, and Tamphanes. He says, why are your mighty ones face down? Because the Lord thrust them down. As I live, declares the king. Isn't it interesting? He draws the contrast, king of Egypt, in verse 17, to the king, whose name is the Lord of hosts. Like Tabor among the mountains, like Carmel by the sea, shall one come. Prepare yourselves baggage for exile, O inhabitants of Egypt. For Memphis shall become a waste, a ruin without inhabitant. Okay? A beautiful heifer is Egypt, but a biting fly from the north. From where? The north comes to her. Okay? Her hired soldiers in her midst are like fattened calves. They're not toned and muscled. They're what? They're lazy and slothful, right? They've turned and fled together. They did not stand, for the day of their calamity has come upon them, the time of their punishment. She makes a sound, Egypt, like a serpent gliding away, for her enemies march in force and come against her with axes, like those who fell trees. Can you hear the destruction? Can you hear them sacking a city, chopping through doors, chopping through walls to get what they want? They shall cut down her forest, though it is impenetrable, because they are more numerous than locusts. They are without number. The daughter of Egypt shall be put to shame. She shall be delivered into the hand of a people from the north. The Lord of hosts says, I'm bringing punishment upon Ammon of Thebes, and Pharaoh, and Egypt, and her gods, and her kings, upon Pharaoh and those who trust in him. Well, God had already done that back in the Exodus, but God is doing it again now. And so you see the point that, again, Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5 reminds us of is God is the God of all nations. And I can't emphasize that enough. And again, I think I want to emphasize this because sometimes we, in our culture and our ideas, thinking that America will never be destroyed, that don't necessarily mean nothing. She was founded upon Christian principles. But a lot of those Christian principles have been sacrificed. So just keep this in mind. God is the God of the nations. And he says, I bring in punishment upon Ammon and Pharaoh and Egypt, and I will deliver them into the hand of those who seek their life, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and his officers. Afterward, Egypt shall be inhabited as in the days of old, declares the Lord. But fear not. Now notice in the midst of this, fear not, Jacob and Israel, for I will save you from far away, and your offspring from the land of their captivity. Jacob shall return and have quiet and ease, and none shall make him afraid. Fear not, my servant Jacob, for I am with you. So in the midst of all this, now you think about this, all that was going on. These people that had been carried away into Babylonian captivity, Ezekiel was there preaching to them, right? And Daniel was over there in Babylon, in this area, preaching. And they had been carried away captive, and they had come back around again this way. And they're probably in Psalms chapter 90. They will be weeping by the river Kibar. And they're crying because our sins have got us here. Can we play the harp? The Babylonians are mocking them. Can we play the harp? Can we play any songs of joy? No, you can't. Not when you're in captivity, right? But what's God saying? Listen, I will make an end to all the nations to which I've driven you, but I will not make you a full end. I will discipline you in just measure, and I will by no means leave you unpunished. You see, God punished his people, but he did not totally annihilate them.
No.
Yes.
Nebuchadnezzar people used to be picking at them. You should have listened to Jeremiah.
Yeah.
You should have listened to Jeremiah.
That's right. And again, that's the whole play out as it plays out, right? If they'd have listened, but not just Jeremiah, but if they'd have listened to Hosea and some of these other guys, Micah, if they'd have listened. But before I pick up a stone and throw at them, again, do we do any better job listening today?
Nope.
Let's be honest. Because we still have the same problems, sins that, we studied Corinthians. Our young people this last year and last leaders were getting ready in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And we've been going slowly through that book I have on Wednesday nights teaching them. And I said, you know what, young people, let me tell you something. Church hasn't changed one bit since Corinth days. You still have sexual immorality in the church.
Yeah.
You still have division in the church. You still have people in the church that live like there is no resurrection, that all their life is all about right here, right now. You have people in church that still don't understand the Lord's Supper, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I want to take my cookies or my crackers and my grape juice and go on, We will have the worship or the Lord's Supper before the preaching. And, well, as long as I get my crackers and grape juice, then I'm all right. I don't have to sit there and listen to that preacher, right? You see what I'm trying to say? So before I pick up a stone and throw at any of these people, I'm sitting there thinking, here we are, in the 21st century in our enlightened age, where we can have more opportunities to preach the gospel than ever before, and we're sitting around making the same sorry, stupid mistakes. Because we won't listen to the Lord. Because my opinion has more sway than all of God's word. What I want is more important. All right, chapter 47. The judgment on the Philistines. The Philistines, and you remember that it was David who finally was able to kind of put them down for a little bit of a period of time. But they had about 5 cities in the Old Testament: Gaza, Ashkelon, and this is an older map here. But they were all along the seacoast of the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, and what happens? You have Gaza, Eglon, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, all of these cities, Ashdod, Gath, Askelon, Eglon, and Gaza. All these cities were Philistine cities. And they were a sore in Judah's flesh. It wasn't, as I said, until the time of David that David finally squashed them. Okay? So here you have the Philistines. All right, these same Philistines. Thus says the Lord, the waters are rising out of the north. Where again? Where? Out of the north. And they shall become an overflowing torrent. They shall overflow the land and all that fills it, the city and those who dwell in it. Men shall cry out and every inhabitant of the land shall wail. So again, it's all coming down through here. So not just was Israel being punished, but Philistia is being punished as well. And he says, for the Lord, the day is coming to destroy all the Philistines, to cut off from Tyre and Sidon every helper that remains. Tyre and Sidon's up here, Tyre's right here. These are seacoast cities. And all these cities down through here, this is where they got it. So whenever they were down here in need of help, they would call for help maybe from up here. But if they're coming down through here, these areas have already been what? Cut off. Tyre, if you read, especially in the book of Ezekiel, Tyre had been surrounded by Nebuchadnezzar. And he was trying his best to take the city. And what they did to save themselves is there was an island out here. And so a couple of nights, they went and left the entire city and came out here to this island. And Nebuchadnezzar wound up leaving them, just left them alone. He was not able to conquer Tyre because they went out here to this island in the Mediterranean Sea. So later, there was another king that started fighting against Tyre. Only this king not only did he have land forces, but he also had naval forces. Anybody remember who it was? Huh? No. It wasn't the Persians. It was Alexander.
Oh, yeah.
Alexander the Great. And what he did, they tried to pull the same stunt with Alexander. And what we read there is Alexander started scraping this city clean here, started throwing it all into the ocean. The people in the island saw what he was doing. He was trying to build a causeway, a bridge. So he just literally scraped that down to a rock. Then he threw all this stuff in the ocean. In the meantime, the citizens out here in the city of Tyre on this island, they were trying to attack them. So, Alexander said, fine. And he gets his Grecian naval forces to surround them. And he goes in there and he attacks them and he takes the city. He destroys it. Alexander the Great destroyed the city at that time. So if you actually look at a satellite photograph of the city of Tyre, you will see from the satellite image, you will see that causeway and everything along there that had happened back in Alexander's time. So that's an extremely interesting idea. Now, the point is they would help one another because of this sea coast, because they could, the naval forces could come back and forth and help them out. But he said, it's not going to help you this time. That's not going to help you this time. For the Lord is destroying the Philistines, the remnant of the coastland of Captor. Baldness has come upon Gaza. Ashkelon has perished. O sword of the Lord, how long till you are quiet? Put yourself into your scabbard, rest be still. But God, through Jeremiah, saying, how can it be quiet when the Lord has given it a charge? When God has charged his sword to punish, it's going to punish. And again, he's the one in charge. So, we have here the chapter 47, the judgment on the Philistines. And it did eventually happen, but it wasn't during the time of Nebuchadnezzar. As I said, it happened during the time of Alexander the Great. All right? Then you have Moab. Now, Moab, let's talk about Moab a minute. Moab was in this area right in here. Okay? Where did Moab come from? Lot's daughters. Lot and Moab, and what was the other one's name? Ammon. Okay. And they both lived here. Here was Ammon. Moab is back up in this area right in here. Okay. So just remember that's what's going on. In Moab, again, you remember that when the children of Israel were at the border of the land of Canaan, that they actually had to fight against the Moabites. But what happened? You remember the situation back in Numbers, chapter 20, 25, where there was a fellow by the name of Balak, and there was a fellow by the name of Balaam.
Yeah.
And Balak hired Balaam to curse the children of Israel. And what did he do? He blessed them every time because God was blessing him, telling him to bless them. And so as a result, what you read, and there's just a small little blurb in Scripture that suggests the idea that what Balaam did was to encourage the Moabites to allow their women to fraternize with the Israelite soldiers. And so in the midst of all this going on, God is punishing the Israelites because they are sleeping with the Moabite women, but really what they were doing in all of this was what? They were fraternizing, number one, with the enemy, but number two, they were worshiping idols. And you remember in one particular circumstance, Moses was standing there, Aaron was standing there, Phinehas saw an Israelite man with a Moabite woman run into a tent. And what did he do? Took a spear and stabbed her. And that stopped the plague. But shortly thereafter, you read about Balaam being destroyed. They killed him later for this situation. So Moab has a history with Israel. And we remember how they had encouraged Israel to sin. Again, that whole story is written for our learning to emphasize again that when we fraternize with the world, this is what's going to wind up happening to us. So here's what he's saying. Woe to Nebo, for it is laid waste. Kiriathaim is put to shame, as it is taken. The fortress is put to shame and broken down. The renown of Moab is no more. In Heshbon they plan disaster against her. Let her cut her off from being a nation. So you also, O man, shall be brought to silence. The sword shall pursue you. A cry from Horonaim, desolation and great destruction. Moab is destroyed. Her little ones have made a cry. At the ascent of Luhith, they go up weeping. For at the descent of Horonaim, they have heard the distressed tribe destruction. And again, who was being destroyed? Again, it was Nebuchadnezzar taking his vengeance on these people too. See, it's not that he just came down through here and that was it. He was attacking and destroying every nation down through here. Everybody was going to have to answer to him. Okay? So, they're being punished. You've trusted in your work. Here's the reason. You've trusted in your works and your treasures. You shall be taken. Chemosh shall go into exile with his priests and his officials. That was his god. Their god was Chemosh. The destroyer shall come upon every city, and no city shall escape. The valley shall perish. The plain shall be destroyed. Give wings to Moab, for she would fly away. Her cities have become a desolation with no inhabitant in them. And then he says this, cursed is he who does the work of the Lord with slackness. And cursed is he who keeps back his sword from bloodshed. Again, he's looking at Nebuchadnezzar's armies as his servants. And he says, you're going to be cursed if you give quarter. Right? Don't do it. Moab has been at ease from his youth. He has settled on his dregs. He has not been emptied from vessel to vessel. And here suggests the ideal of a wine. And again, at that time, they couldn't necessarily filter out all the impurities. So they would let the wine sit so as to what? All the bad particles would drop to the bottom. So he says here, Moab, in essence, is like a wine that has settled on its dregs. They've not been emptied from vessel to vessel. He's not gone into exile, so his taste remains in him. But guess what? I will send to him pourers who will pour him and empty his vessels and break his jars in pieces. Then Moab shall be ashamed of this god Chemosh, as the house of Israel was ashamed of Bethel, their confidence. How do you say, he says, we are heroes and mighty men of war. The destroyer of Moab and his cities has come up, and the choices of his young men have gone down to slaughter, declares the king. And again, here he is described, the king who is who? The Lord of hosts, the king of the nations, right? The calamity of Moab is near at hand, his affliction hastens swiftly. Grieve for him, all you who are around him, who know his name, for his mighty scepter is broken, the glorious staff. Come down from your glory, O inhabitant of Dibon. For the destroyer of Moab has come up against you. He has destroyed your strongholds. So he talks about these different inhabitants, Dibon, Aurora. Moab is put to shame. Tell it beside the Arnon that Moab is laid waste. Arnon is this river the river Arnon, Jabbok. Where is it? I saw it.
Jeff down there by Ammon, up a little bit. River Jabbok.
Yeah, Jabbok is right here. Arnon, Ramuk, the river Yamuk. There's another. Let me see if I can find this other. I'm just trying as much as I can to find these places on the map, so as to give you the idea of where all these places are. These rivers.
What river is it?
Huh?
What river?
Arnon.
Arnon is in Moab.
Huh?
Moab.
Yeah.
The river.
So what to say is,
Coming off the Dead Sea.
yeah, okay. So it's south.
So it runs right through the middle of Moab. Running on the river.
All right. So it should be coming off. It should be one of these areas. Right there it is, right there. The river Arnon is right there. Okay. Well, that's the very first. That's the very first video, right? So it's right down here. That's right. That's right. Thank you, brother. So, judgment has come upon the tableland. Tableland is the area around the river. Holon, Jaza, Maptha, Dibon, Nebo, Beth Diblaim, all these different cities he lists here. The horn is cut off. His arm is broken. Make him drunk because he's magnified himself against the Lord, so that Moab shall wallow in his vomit. Huh?
No, it's only verse 26.
Oh, okay, yeah. Was he found among thieves that whenever you spoke of him, you wagged your head? Leave the cities, dwell in the rock, O inhabitants of Moab. Be like dove that nests in the side of the mouth of gorge. We've heard of the pride of Moab, of his loftiness, his pride, and his arrogance. I know his insolence. His boasts are false, his deeds are false. So I will wail for Moab. And he keeps on going through this whole thing, emphasizing the wine ceases from the winepress. No one shouts with joy. And so the outcry at Heshbon, even to Elealeh, as far as Jahaz, they utter their voice, and I will bring an end to Moab. Him who offers sacrifices in the high place and makes offerings to his God. My heart moans for Moab. Isn't that interesting that even here, God is mourning over those that he's having to punish? Every head is shaved, every beard cut off. In the Old Testament, beards placed a great deal of emphasis. It seemed like all the men had beards. In fact, when David's men had gone to talk to Rabbah of the Ammonites, and remember how they desecrated or how they embarrassed them by cutting their robes off at their buttocks, shaving half their beard and so forth, they had to come back and grow their beard. So this whole idea is an emphasis upon how God was talking about those set apart people. Children of Israel, all of them had beards. Isn't that interesting? One shall fly swiftly like an eagle, spread his wings against Moab. The city shall be taken, stronghold ceased. The heart of the warriors shall be in pain. It shall no longer be a people, because why? She has Moab as what? Testified herself against the Lord. So he who flees from the terror, verse 44, shall fall into the pit. He who climbs out of the pit shall be caught in the snare. And in these things upon Moab, the year of their punishment. So in the shadow of Heshbon, the cities are destroyed. The fugitives stopped without strength. Fire came out from Heshbon and Sihon, and it destroyed Moab. And they're all undone. Then he talks about the Ammonites. The Moabites and the Ammonites, again, they came from Lot. You go back and you read the story about the Ammonites, we really begin to see about that in the time of David. 2 Samuel chapter 11, 10, 11, 12. And it was during this time in Rabbah of the Ammonites. Ammonites was back up in this area in here, so he was fighting. There's Heshbon, all right? There's Heshbon there. Mercurius. So these are the important places. I'm trying to see if I could find Rabbah. In one of the maps, it shows it as Rabbah Ammon here. So this is where Rabbah was, okay? And you remember that was a whole situation that David and his armies were fighting against Rabbah whenever he committed the sin with Bathsheba. Remember that? So just kind of keep in mind where he was. Jerusalem is back over this way. Ammon, the Ammonites from over here, and he destroys them because of that. So again, here is, has Israel no sons? Has he no heir? Why then has Milcom dispossessed Gad? Milcom is a god. This was the god of the Ammonites. Now, who is the god of the Moabites? Shemosh. Milcom is the god of the Ammonites. And so he says again, I will cause the battle cry to be heard against Rabbah of the Ammonites. So this place has a lot of history to it as well. All right, even in the time of David. It shall become a desolate mound. Its villages shall be burned with fire. Then Israel shall dispossess those who dispossessed him. O Heshbon, for Ai is laid waste. Cry out, O daughters of Rabbah, put on sackcloth. And then he says, Milcom shall go into exile. Why do you boast of your valleys? But then he says this, but afterwards, verse 6, I will restore the fortunes of the Ammonites, right? Declares the Lord. Then Edom. Edom is down here. And where did Edom come from? Esau. Right. So again, all of these nations, have you noticed Egypt, the Philistines, Ammonites, Moabites, the Edomites, all of them are being punished because, again, God is doing that. So here again is wisdom no more in Teman. By the way, what one chapter book of the Old Testament is a total denunciation of Edom?
Is it one book?
One chapter book.
Oh, one chapter.
There's only one chapter. By the way, it is the only book of the Old Testament that has one chapter.
The Bible? You said the one has one chapter.
This particular book has one chapter. That's all. It's just one chapter. It's not Habakkuk. Habakkuk has 3.
Right.
No, Micah has at least 8, I think. It's Obadiah. And Obadiah is Obadiah, as you look at Obadiah, that very, very small book of the Old Testament, I think it has 16 verses maybe. He condemns Edom because when Nebuchadnezzar sacked Jerusalem, the Edomites were capturing. They were capturing the Israelites and turning them over to the Babylonian forces. Not only that, but they were hoping that they could go in there and what? They were hoping they could go in there and take part of the spoil. So Obadiah comes down very hard on them because of that very reason. And so here you have again this idea, God's punishment upon Esau. And again, think about that. Esau was kin to Israel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you think about years and years and years, hundreds of years later, Esau and the descendants of Jacob and the descendants of Esau are still after one another's throats. Isn't that amazing? But God finally says in Obadiah, you shall be punished. Because why? And there's a very interesting little phrase there in the book of Obadiah that a lot of preachers, if they ever preach on anything out of Obadiah, it's going to be this little phrase, you stood by and watched. And think about how so many people today stand by. He will say, who shall bring me down to the ground? And he says, I'm sorry, it's 21 verses, so forgive me. He said, because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, you stood aloof. When the foreigners entered his gate and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. You have stood by in the day of his distress. And so as a result, he said, the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Esau shall be stubble. And they're going to burn you and consume them because you stood by the other side. You didn't watch out for your brothers. And more often than not, that's the passage that's talked about in the book of Obadiah because they weren't watching out for their brothers, Israel. Isn't that interesting? We come to the New Testament and it emphasizes the idea that we're to exhort one another, love one another, have the same care for one another. You know, but sometimes maybe have we become a little bit like Edom? We got brothers or sisters that we're not watching out for. We're just standing by the side, watching them going on a path of destruction and not trying to do anything to stop them. Well, the Lord's word really comes down hard on this sometimes, doesn't it? So, coming back to Jeremiah 49:7, is wisdom no more in Teman? Again, it's the idea that there's no more wisdom there. Counsel has perished from the prudent. He says, turn back, dwell in the depths, O inhabitants of Dedan. I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him. If great gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? At least they would leave gleanings. But I have stripped Esau bare. I have uncovered his hiding places. He's not able to conceal himself. His children are destroyed. Leave your fatherless children. I will leave them alive, and let your widows trust in me. He said, if those who do not deserve to drink the cup must drink it, will you go unpunished? Will you go unpunished? You shall not go unpunished, but you have to drink just as well as everybody else. Okay? And then he goes on, and what's interesting is you read this in this particular place, beginning in verse 7 and going through verse 22, this actually becomes about the same length as the book of Obadiah itself. And here you have Jeremiah saying, I've heard a message from the Lord, and an envoy shall be sent among the nations. Gather together and come against her. I will make you small among the nations. The horror you inspired has deceived you, and the pride of your heart. You who lived in the cleft of the rock. The cleft of the rock, right? You remember that there was a group of people that had cut themselves a city in the side of a mountain. The city Petra. Remember that? No? Well, go back and read or listen to the Indiana Jones movie, the third one. But there is actually a city close to where Edom, where this area is. They cut in. It's literally cut into the side of the mountain. And then look up the word city Petra on Google, and you'll find out that these are where the descendants of those folks came from. And they felt like that because they were in the mountains, and they had done this in this way, and especially as you read about the city itself, it was shut in. So they actually only had 3 entrances to the city, and the rest of it was mountains. So for anybody to come over, they actually had to climb over mountains, come into Petra. And that's where they felt like that they were going to be strong and forceful and no problems, but that city was taken to. He says, you live in the cleft of the rocks who hold the height of the hill. You make your nest as high as the eagles, but I'm going to bring you down, says the Lord. Edom shall become a horror. It shall be horrified and will hiss. As when Sodom and Gomorrah, and isn't it interesting, as he's talked about all these nations now, he's always talked about the fact that they still had some remnant left, but he says this is going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah. No man shall dwell there, no man shall sojourn in her. Like a lion coming up from the jungle of Jordan against a perennial pasture, I shall make him run away from her. And I will appoint over her whomever I choose, who's like me, who will summon me, what shepherd can stand before me. Hear the plan that the Lord has made against Edom and the purposes that he has formed against the inhabitants of Teman. He says, even the little ones of the flock shall be dragged away. Their fold shall be appalled at the fate. The sound of their fall, the earth shall tremble. Now, notice the phrase, the little ones of the flock shall be dragged away. He was not talking about sheep. He's talking about their children. Okay? And the ideal is the heart of the warriors of Edom shall be in that day like the heart of a woman in her birth pains. All righty. Now, we come now to the next city. And what city is that? And Damascus is where? What was it the capital of? Syria. Right. And it's still the capital of Syria, isn't it? Damascus is one of the oldest cities upon the face of the earth. What do you think about that? And so here's Damascus. And so he says here, he's talking about Syria now. The Syrians have always been a problem with the Israelites as well, right? So nothing has changed over the centuries, really. Syria is still having its problems right now, right? So chew on that. He says Damascus has become feeble. She's turned to flee. Panic seized her. Anguish and sorrows have taken hold of her as a woman in labor. Isn't it interesting that he often talks about whenever they are being punished, that he compares it to a woman in labor? And that is her moment of weakness. You think about it. She's very weak because she's trying to deliver a child. So here's the same. So here's the city as a woman in labor. Panic seized her. The famous city is not forsaken, the city of my joy. All her young men shall fall in her squares, and I will kill them with fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall devour the strongholds of Ben-Hadad. Now we remember Ben-Hadad a lot, and if you go back and read 1st to 2nd Kings, you'll find Ben-Hadad mentioned over and over and over again. The problem is a lot of us think that that's just one king. It's not. He just continued. It continues the lineage of Ben-Hadad. Okay. Yeah, much the same way. He's called Ben-Hadad because he's the king, but it's not just the same guy because there's no way that guy could have lived that long. Okay, so I just want to keep in that mind. That's what he was the king, or the king that might have started Syria, and so everybody else from that point forward. Then there's that. Finally, as we're looking at this last part here in chapter 49, we see again the ideal of Kedar and the kingdoms of Hazor. Hazor is right here. Hazor is right here, north of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, this is called the waters of Merom right here. Hazor is right here, if you're looking at a map. Now, if you're wanting to know where Kedar is right in here, the northernmost part of the Arabian Peninsula. So from all the way up there, all the way down here. So he's kind of, I think as he's looking at it here, he's summing everything up from here all the way down, okay, as you look at it. Thus says the Lord, rise up, advance against Kedar, destroy the people of the east. Their tents and their flocks shall be taken, curtains and all their goods, camels. And the men shall cry to them terror on every side. Flee, wander far away, depths dwell in the depths, O inhabitants of Hazor. He says, for Nebuchadnezzar has made a plan against you and formed a purpose. Rise against a nation at ease that dwells securely, no gates or bars that dwells alone. Their camels shall become plunder, and I will scatter to every wind those who cut the corners of their hair and bring their calamity from every side. Hazor shall become a haunt of jackals and everlasting waste. No man shall dwell there, no man shall sojourn in her. So it could be, as you're looking at it, he's talking about, in essence, the totality of the judgment and how bad it's all going to be all through this whole thing, and kind of summing it up. Then you have Elam. Where's Elam? Well, I was looking at this earlier, trying to get in my mind what exactly it was, trying to find a map. And this map shows Elam right here. This is Media and Persia, down close to Babylon right here. So here you have Elam. And again, this was during the Elam in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah. I will break the bow of Elam, the mainstay of their might. I will bring Elam the four winds from the four quarters of heaven. Remember that. I will bring upon Elam the four winds from the four quarters of heaven. Compare that with the book of Revelation, where the angels are standing on the four corners of the earth with the winds, okay? And scatter them to all these winds, and there shall be no nation to those which the driven out of Elam shall not come. I will terrify Elam before her enemies and before those who seek their life. I will bring disaster upon them. I will send the sword after them until I have consumed them. And I will set my throne in Elam and destroy their kings and officials, declares the Lord. So here Elam is going to be destroyed. Persia and Mede's going to come on the scene next, Daniel chapter 2. That's going to be the ones after Babylon. And then it's going to be Greece. Then it's going to be Rome. And there's the beginning of the church. Chapter 50. What's going to happen to Babylon? Judgment. That's right. And again, you think about this. So this is a long, long thing. And again, I have to emphasize that, I've tried my best to cover as much of this material as I can, but just here it is. Here's the land of the Chaldeans. And I think it's very proper as you come to the end of the book of Jeremiah that this is what's happening. He has talked about and warned them over and over again about judgment coming from Babylon. But he's also left the idea that God was going to leave a remnant that were going to be saved. Even though these folks will wind up in Babylon, What's going to finally eventually happen to Babylon? She's going to be punished as well.
Mhm.
Nebuchadnezzar was the greatest king Babylon had. He lived for about 50 years after he became king, which says a lot. But after that, you start looking at the history of the Babylonian Empire, and it's one weak king right after the other, until finally Daniel chapter 7, is that right? Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6. We read that the city was taken by the Medes and Persians that night. So, look at this. Declare among the nations and proclaim, Babylon is taken, Bel is put to shame, Merodach is dismayed, her images are put to shame, her idols are dismayed. Now, as God begins to describe this declaration against Babylon, who does he attack first? Their gods. Their gods that they bragged had brought them so many victories. God starts off by saying what? Their gods shall be destroyed. For out of the north, a nation has come up against her, which shall make her land a desolation, and none shall dwell in it, and they shall flee away. So where do the Medes and Persians come from? This area here, Armenia, Media, there's Persia and area, Iraq in here. So this is where they're coming, out of the north and all this. And again, Babylon is right down here in this area, so they're all coming from here. All right? In those days, declares the Lord, the people of Israel, the people of Judah shall come together, weeping as they come, and they shall seek the Lord their God. Remember Jeremiah 37. The valley of the dry bones, and the two sticks that are made one. Remember that? So here again, Jeremiah is coming back to that same idea. And they shall ask the way to Zion with faces turned toward us, and come let us join ourselves to the Lord in an everlasting covenant that will never be forgotten. Wow. Right? This same everlasting covenant Jeremiah talked about in Jeremiah 31 through 34. Isn't it interesting? He's tying all this stuff together now. Flee from the midst of Babylon. Go out of the land of the Chaldeans. Be as the male goats before the flock. Of stirring up and bringing against Babylon a gathering of great nations from the north. They shall array themselves against her, and she shall be taken. Arrows like a skilled warrior who does not return empty-handed. Chaldea shall be plundered. Though you rejoice, though you exult, O plunderers of my heritage, though you frolic like a heifer in the pasture, and neigh like stallions, your mother shall be utterly shamed, and she who bore you shall be disgraced. You shall be the last of the nations, a wilderness, a dry land, a desert. Because of the wrath of the Lord, she shall not be inhabited, but shall be in utter desolation. Everyone who passes by Babylon will be appalled and hiss because of all of her wounds. Shoot at her, spare no arrows, for she sinned against the Lord. Raise a shout against her all around. She has surrendered. Her bulwarks have fallen. Her walls are thrown down. But this is the vengeance of the Lord. Take vengeance on her and do to her as she has done. Read Isaiah chapter 14 in comparison with this. Isaiah prophesies of the destruction of Babylon. He talks about 14, 15, I think, Isaiah 14, 15, 16. And what is interesting about this is so many people look at that passage of scripture in Isaiah 14, and he mentions and calls the king of Babylon Lucifer. So everybody thinks that that's talking about Satan, right? And talking about how Satan has tried to exalt himself above all nations. That's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar did. Look at the story of Daniel chapter 4, where he had to be humbled. So all of Isaiah 14 and 15, 16 is telling us somewhat the same story. So it's interesting to study these things together and look and see how she's emphasized and how it's going to do it. So was he saying the vengeance of the Lord is taken on her as he has done? Do to her as she has done. You know, we will be punished the way we have punished others. So cut off from Babylon the sower. Cut off Israel as a hunted sheep driven away by lions. Again, first the king of Assyria. Now at last Nebuchadnezzar has gnawed his bones. He said, I'm bringing punishment on the king of Babylon and his land as I punished the land of Assyria. Notice verse 22 and 23, the noise of the battle is in the land, the hammer of the whole earth is cut down. Babylon has become a horror among the nations. I caught you, God says. You were taken. He said, the Lord has opened his armory, brought out his weapons of his wrath. So Babylon was going to be punished for what she had done to God's people. And he says, I'm against you, O proud one. declares the Lord.
That's,
Huh?
He's going to punish them for what he had them do.
Right. But you've also got to realize that Daniel was there trying to help Nebuchadnezzar get his act together, right? And did Nebuchadnezzar do it? No. So guess what? That's the emphasis. God uses one nation to punish another, but he will punish that nation that he uses too. That's right. He never did. He never did. And the nation just fell apart after he died. Study and really go back and read the history and see how many kings they had in a very, very short period of time and how they fell in no time at all. He talks about the people of Israel, verse 33, are oppressed, the people of Judah with them. But their Redeemer, verse 34, is strong. The Lord of hosts is his name. So God will bring a sword against the Chaldeans and against the inhabitants of Babylon and against her officials and wise men. And so a sword against the diviners, her warriors, her horses, all her treasures, a drought. It is the lamb of images, and they are mad over idols, verse 36. Therefore, wild beasts shall dwell with hyenas in Babylon and ostriches. She shall never again have people. As when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, so no man shall dwell there, and no son of man shall sojourn in her. And so again, we read, comparing it all to that together, you realize that God was punishing her because of what he had used her to punish his people.
Yeah, that takes you back to Daniel when Daniel was telling them that about the vision.
Right.
The God of heaven revealed this.
That's right.
You know, and not their soothsayers or their diviners or magicians and stuff.
That's right. That's right. That's it. Next week, you get into chapter 51 in the book of Lamentations. Chapter 51, however, is just a repeat of what, like I said earlier, it just repeats Jerusalem being destroyed once again. Now you go into Lamentations. All righty? Thank you, guys. Appreciate it so much. I hope that I helped. I know I don't do as good a job as brother. That's right, I did. Glad to see all of you here. Thank you so very, very much, brother. Appreciate it.
The map looks like a visualization.
Were y'all saying something to me? I'm sorry.
So thank you.
Oh, okay. Got you now, brother. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hope you've learned a lot. Thank you much.